Good evening and welcome to the Jerome L. Greene Performance Space at WQXR. We are so pleased that all of you are here tonight, and we are really delighted to welcome these 8 gentlemen who hail from the Twin Cities of Minneapolis and St. Paul and are part of a wonderful legacy of a cappella vocal music. They are called Cantus. They do about 75 concerts a year, so they are very busy gentlemen. The group, over the course of its lifetime, has produced about a dozen albums, and they have won numerous awards named for some of the most illustrious names in American choral music. Chorus America has blessed Cantus with awards for Margaret Hillis and for Alice Parker and for Louis Botto and for Dale Warland. So these people are steeped in the American choral tradition, and they're very fine. And we are so pleased to welcome them tonight to share with you some of their 3 tales of Christmas. Please welcome Cantus.
God rest ye merry gentlemen, let nothing you dismay, for Jesus Christ our Savior was born on Christmas Day, to save us all from Satan's power when we were gone astray. Oh, tidings of comfort and joy, comfort and joy, oh, tidings of comfort and joy. From God our heavenly Father a blessed angel came, and unto certain shepherds brought tidings of the same, how that in Bethlehem was born the Son of God by name. Oh, tidings of comfort and joy, comfort and joy, oh, tidings of comfort and joy. The shepherds at those tidings rejoiced much in mind, and left their flocks a-feeding in tempest, storm, and wind, and went to Bethlehem straightway this blessed babe to find. Oh, tidings of comfort and joy, comfort and joy, oh, tidings of comfort and joy. But when to Bethlehem they came, whereat this infant lay, they found him in a manger where oxen feed on hay, his mother Mary kneeling unto the Lord did pray. Oh, tidings of comfort and joy, comfort and joy, oh, tidings of comfort and joy. Now to the Lord sing praises, all you within this place, and with true love and brotherhood each other now embrace. This holy child of Christmas all others doth deface. Oh, tidings of comfort and joy, comfort and joy, oh, tidings of comfort and joy.
Selections from 3 tales of Christmas, the first of which is Charles Dickens' A Christmas Carol, and the carol that you just heard is the one featured in the opening scene of the book, a little boy singing through Scrooge's keyhole, and he does not take kindly to it. But it is a wonderful carol, and I should add, too, that if you don't know that, and you gentlemen may not know this either, but the original manuscript of A Christmas Carol is held here in New York at the Morgan Library. And there is an exhibition on now that will continue through, I think, the first week of January, focusing on that manuscript, so you can go and see some of it sitting there. And this is the 150th anniversary year of Charles Dickens' 1867 reading tour, when he came to the United States and performed in New York and performed A Christmas Carol. Made a lot of money late in his life and strained himself horribly reading A Christmas Carol. And they're also featuring this year some of the other Christmas tales that he wrote. Not as successful as A Christmas Carol, but they're part of the Dickens legacy as well. So we're going to continue now with the second of these 3 tales of Christmas. Zachary Colby is the tenor before me now, and you are from Indiana?
I am, yes, Crown Point.
All right, so proud. Any other Indianans here? None? None?
It's all right.
Odds weren't good. Let's talk a little bit about how Cantus works. You are one of only 2 male professional vocal ensembles in the United States, and you are entirely artist-run, which means you guys supervise all the work that you do. So how do you figure that out?
Very carefully. So yeah, as you know, we're a chamber ensemble, and we sort of share the burden of producing, rehearsing, programming, and setting up all kinds of different things. And so we do it through collaboration and lots of talking.
But somebody has to make some decisions at some point. So how do you, if it's a particular piece of music, how do you run it? How do you put it together?
So every piece has we use what we call the producer system. So every piece has a producer that we assign, and that person sort of shepherds it through the chamber music process. They do the pre-work of languages, of background research, kind of like a conductor would do, and then they present sort of the bare bones of what we're going to do and get it on its feet. And then once it's kind of smooth sailing with most of the notes and rhythms and all of that good stuff, then we let the chamber music process take hold, and we all put our hands in and kind of shape the clay to what it will be.
It's terrific. It's a terrific way of doing it, and the collaboration is a huge part of what you do. The second of the 3 tales of Christmas was written by, I think, the only famous American author who is also a candy bar. Somebody's got it, right? O. Henry is correct. O. Henry is correct. There's no connection between the candy bar and the author except the name. O. Henry was William Sidney Porter. He was born in North Carolina, moved himself to Texas, started writing there, apparently started embezzling from a bank he worked in there. So he had to escape to South America and spent some time in Honduras, and he's the fellow who coined the term banana republic when he was down there. Came back, went to jail, got out of jail, published stories while he was in jail. He would send them to a friend who would send them to magazines so they didn't know that the author was in prison. And in 1902, he came to New York because that's where his publishers were. So O. Henry spent about 8 years in New York. In the course of that time, he wrote nearly 400 short stories that were published in a New York newspaper. A few of them are very famous. The Ransom of Red Chief, you may have read. There are a couple of others. Wonderful tale. All these little twist endings that they had. And then there's O. Henry's most famous story, and it's the Christmas story, the gift of the Magi. And how are we going to share that with everyone?
Yeah, so Cantus's model is not only through collaboration, but we also believe that our music making should tell a story and should be narrative. So that's sort of what our artistic principles are based around. So at this time of year, we all like to share those treasured tales. And so you heard a glimpse of the Christmas Carol. And so this will be a telling of O. Henry's Gift of the Magi, and we'll have readings, and there'll be underscore. And we really want to integrate the story in sort of a real way.
All right, so here is the Gift of the Magi from Cantus.
Ding dong, ding dong, ding dong, ding, ding dong, ding dong, ding dong, ding dong, ding, ding dong. Silver and gold, silver and gold. Everyone wishes for silver and gold.
How do you measure its worth? Just by the pleasure it gives here on earth. Silver and gold, silver and gold means so much more when I see. Silver and gold decoration on every Christmas tree.
$1.87. That was all. And 60 cents of it was in pennies. Pennies saved 1 and 2 at a time by bulldozing the grocer and the vegetable man and the butcher until one's cheeks burned with the silent imputation of parsimony that such close dealing implied. 3 times Della counted it. $1.87. And the next day would be Christmas.
Silver and gold, silver and gold means so much more when I see.
Silver and gold
wise men brought gifts to the manger, I'm told.
Mary was humbled to see shepherds and kings here on bended knee.
Silver and gold, filling the world with their light.
Silver and gold, how they shimmer
On every Christmas night.
There was clearly nothing to do but flop down on the shabby little couch and howl. So Della did it, which instigates the moral reflection that life is made up of sobs, sniffles, and smiles, with sniffles predominating. Della finished her cry and attended to her cheeks with the powder rag. She stood by the window and looked out dully at a gray cat walking a gray fence in a gray backyard. Tomorrow would be Christmas Day, and she had only $1.87 with which to buy Jim a present. She had been saving every penny she could for months with this result. $20 a week doesn't go far. Expenses had been greater than she had calculated. They always are. $1.87 to buy a present for Jim, her Jim. Many a happy hour she had spent planning for something nice for him, something fine and rare and sterling. Something just a little bit near to being worthy of the honor of being owned by Jim. Suddenly, she whirled from the window and stood before the glass. Her eyes were shining brilliantly, but her face had lost its color within 20 seconds. Rapidly, she pulled down her hair and let it fall to its full length. Now, there were two possessions of Jim and Della in which they both took a mighty pride. One was Jim's gold watch that had been his father's and his grandfather's. The other was Della's hair. Had the Queen of Sheba lived in the flat across the air shaft, Della would have let her hair hang out the window someday to dry, just to depreciate Her Majesty's jewels and gifts. Had King Solomon been the janitor, with all his treasures piled up in the basement, Jim would have pulled out his watch every time he passed, just to see him pluck at his beard from envy. So now Della's beautiful hair fell about her, rippling and shining like a cascade of brown waters. It reached below her knee and made itself almost a garment for her. And then she did it up again, nervously and quickly. Once she faltered for a minute and stood still while a tear or two splashed on the worn red carpet. On went her old brown jacket, on went her old brown hat. With a whirl of skirts and with the brilliant sparkle still in her eyes, she fluttered out the door and down the stairs to the street.
Noël, nouvelle, Noël, chantons ici. Dévotes gens, rendons à Dieu merci.
Chantons Noël pour le roi nouvelet. Noël, nouvelet, Noël, chantons ici.
Quand je m'éveillais, je assez dormi. Ouvris les yeux, vis un arbre fleuri, dont il sortait en bouton merveilleux. Noël, nouvelet, Noël, chantons ici. Noël, nouvelet, Noël, chantons ici.
master dise parte disi, omegnem truverem aile, noe nuvele, noe chantos ici, noe nuvele, noe chantos ici. Chantons Noël pour le roi nouvel, Noël nouvel, Noël chantons ici. Where she stopped, the sign read, Madame Sophronie, hair goods of all kinds. One flight up Della ran and collected herself, panting. Madam, large, too white, chilly, hardly looked the Sophronie. Will you buy my hair? Asked Della. Down rippled the brown cascade. $20, said Madam, lifting the mass with a practiced hand. Oh, and the next 2 hours tripped by on rosy wings. She was ransacking the stores for Jim's present. She found it at last. It surely had been made for Jim and no one else. There was no other like it in any of the stores, and she had turned all of them inside out. It was a platinum fob chain, simple and chaste in design, properly proclaiming its value by substance alone, and not by meretricious ornamentation, as all good things should do. It was even worthy of the watch. As soon as she saw it, she knew that it must be Jim's. It was like him, quietness and value. The description applied to both. $21 they took from her for it, and she hurried home with the 87 cents. With that chain on his watch, Jim might be properly anxious about the time in any company. Grand as the watch was, he sometimes looked at it on the sly on account of the old leather strap that he used in place of a chain. When Della reached home, her intoxication gave way a little to prudence and reason. She got out her curling irons and lighted the gas and went to work repairing the ravages made by generosity added to love, which is always a tremendous task, dear friends, a mammoth task. Within 40 minutes, her head was covered with tiny, close-lying curls that made her look wonderfully like a truant schoolboy. She looked at her reflection in the mirror long, carefully, and critically. If Jim doesn't kill me, she said to herself, before he takes a second look at me, he'll say I look like a Coney Island chorus girl. But what could I do? What could I do with $1.87?
worship the beloved with a kiss. What shall I give him, poor as I am? If I were a shepherd, I would bring a lamb. If I were a wise man, I would do my part. Yet what I cannot give him, give my heart.
At 7 o'clock, the coffee was made and the frying pan was on the back of the stove, hot and ready to cook the chops. Suddenly, she heard his step on the stair, away down on the first step, and she turned white for just a moment. She whispered, "Please God, make him think I am still pretty." The door opened and Jim stepped in and closed it. He looked thin and very serious. He needed a new overcoat, and he was without gloves. Jim stopped inside the door as immovable as a setter at the scent of a quail. His eyes were fixed upon Della, and there was an expression in them that she could not read, and it terrified her. It was not anger, nor surprise, nor disapproval, nor horror, nor any of the sentiments that she had been prepared for. He simply stared at her fixedly with that peculiar expression on his face. "Jim, darling," she cried, "don't look at me that way. I had my hair cut off and sold because I couldn't have lived through Christmas without giving you a present. It'll grow out again. You won't mind, will you? I just had to do it. My hair grows awfully fast. Say Merry Christmas, Jim, and let's be happy. You don't know what a beautiful, nice gift I've got for you." "You've cut off your hair?" "Cut it off and sold it," said Della. "Don't you like me just as well anyhow? I'm me without my hair, ain't I?" "You say your hair is gone?" "You needn't look for it," said Della. "It's sold, I tell you, sold and gone too. It's Christmas Eve, boy. Be good to me, for it went for you. Maybe the hairs of my head were numbered, but nobody could ever count my love for you, Jim. Shall I put the chops on?" Out of his trance, Jim seemed quickly to wake. He enfolded his Della. Jim drew a package from his overcoat pocket and threw it upon the table. "Don't make any mistake about me, Dell. I don't think there's anything in the way of a haircut or a shave or a shampoo that could make me like my girl any less. But if you'll unwrap that package, you may see why you had me going a while at first." White fingers and nimble tore at the string and paper, and then an ecstatic scream of joy, and then, alas, a quick change to tears. For there lay the combs, the set of combs side and back that Della had worshipped long in a Broadway window. Beautiful combs, pure tortoise shell with jeweled rims, just the shade to wear in the beautiful vanished hair. They were expensive combs, she knew, and her heart had simply craved and yearned over them without the least hope of possession. And now they were hers. But the tresses that should have adorned the coveted adornments were gone. But she hugged them to her bosom, and at length she was able to look up with dim eyes and a smile and say, "My hair grows so fast, Jim."
Lo, how a rose a-blooming from tender stem hath sprung. Of Jesse's lineage coming, as men of old have sung.
Della leaped up like a little singed cat and cried, "Oh, oh!" Jim had not yet seen his beautiful present. She held it out to him eagerly upon her open palm. The dull, precious metal seemed to flash with a reflection of her bright and ardent spirit. "Isn't it a dandy, Jim? I hunted all over town to find it. You'll have to look at the time 100 times a day now. Give me your watch. I want to see how it looks on it." Instead of obeying, Jim tumbled down on the couch and put his hands under the back of his head and smiled. "Dell," he said, "let's put our Christmas presents away and keep them a while. They're too nice to use just at present." "I sold the watch to get the money to buy your combs. And now suppose we put the chops on."
O flower whose fragrance tender with sweetness fills the air, dispel with glorious splendor the darkness everywhere. True man, yet very God, from sin and death now save us, and share our every load.
The Magi, as you know, were wise men, wonderfully wise men, who brought gifts to the babe in the manger. They invented the art of giving Christmas presents. Being wise, their gifts were no doubt wise ones, possibly bearing the privilege of exchange in case of duplication. And here I have lamely related to you the uneventful chronicle of two foolish children who most unwisely sacrificed for each other the greatest treasures of their house. But in a last word to the wise of these days, let it be said that of all who give gifts, these two were the wisest. O all who give and receive gifts such as they are wisest. Everywhere they are wisest. They are the Magi.
Who knocks tonight's door legs? Zoe reporter said. 3 kings stood at the gate, each with a crown on head. The serving man bowed down. Bowed down. Said he, "In all this town is no fit place for you." Alight the manger lit. There lay the mother meek. Said they, "This place is fit. Here is the rest which we seek." Loosed their strings, so stood they unshod.
Oh my goodness is right. It's exactly right. Yeah, really, it's a touching tale, isn't it? Isn't it? So here's to that poor, embezzling, law-breaking, running, fabulous wordsmith O. Henry. And to a couple of the fellows in Cantus, Jacob Christopher and Michael McGlynn. Raise your hands, raise your hands. Oh, okay, all right. Michael's a former member. Did some of the arrangements for this in that. So which one did you arrange?
In the Bleak Midwinter.
Yeah. So the musicianship is deep. All right. So Charles Dickens is A Christmas Carol, and O. Henry is The Gift of the Magi, and our third tale of Christmas also has a wonderful New York connection because the fellow who wrote it was born here in 1779. And his dad was a big deal in the Episcopal Church, now the Episcopal Church in the United States of America, not of England. And the fellow's mother had a wonderful, wealthy family. So this fellow, the fellow who wrote our third tale, was born in the country far north of New York City in an estate called the Chelsea Estate. And it was just a little bit north of Houston Street. But in the latter part of the 1700s, that was out in the country. It was clear out. So it was a beautiful country estate, and this fellow inherited that and sold it off bit by bit through the course of his lifetime and became a very wealthy man. He was also a teacher at General Theological Seminary, with which he was associated for many years, and also of Columbia College, later Columbia University. And in 1823, I think, in an upstate paper, a poem was printed that told a tale of a visit from St. Nicholas. And then another decade or so went by, and this fellow claimed authorship of the poem. So Clement Clarke Moore wrote The Visit from St. Nicholas, and that's the third of our Christmas tales. Chris Foss is here, and it was your fascination with this tale or your assignment to put this to music? It's a daunting task, it seems to me. You must have loved the story.
It was somewhere in between those two things, actually. But I grew up reading this with my family, and I think we've even studied it in school. So it's just an instant classic poem that I think is very well known.
Cantus is, am I right? It's a double quartet, tenor, tenor, baritone, bass, 2 times. Is that right?
That's exactly right. So we have 4 tenors that sort of share the tenor 1, tenor 2 duties between them, and then our baritones and basses sort of mostly stick to their own, I think. Yeah.
Baritones can't be trusted. They wander around a great deal. So did you write this for this group, or did you write it for a larger audience over time? Other groups might take it up. What were you thinking when you put it together?
Oh, it was definitely written for this show. I suppose time will tell if anyone else thinks it's good enough to do. So we'll see. I don't know.
All right, so A Visit from St. Nicholas with the music written by Chris Foss and the performance by Cantus.
Twas the night before Christmas, when all through the house not a creature was stirring, not even a mouse. The stockings were hung by the chimney with care, in hopes that St. Nicholas soon would be there. The children were nestled
all snug in their beds, while visions of sugar plums danced in their heads. And I in her kerchief, and I in my cap, had just settled down for a long winter's nap. When out on the lawn, there arose such a clatter, I sprang from my bed to see what was the matter. Away to the window I flew like a flash, tore open the shutters, and threw off the sash. The moon on the breast of the new fallen snow gave the luster of midday to objects below. When what to my wondering eye should appear but a miniature sleigh and 8 tiny reindeer with a little driver so lively and quick, I knew in a moment he must be Saint Nick. More rapid than eagles, his coursers they came, and he whistled and shouted and called them by name. Now Dasher, now Dancer, now Prancer and Vixen, on Comet, on Cupid, on Donner and Blitzen. To the top of the porch, to the top of the wall. Now dash away, dash away, dash away, oh. As dry leaves that before the wild hurricane fly, when they meet with an obstacle, So up to the housetop the coursers they flew, with a sleigh full of toys, and Saint Nicholas too. And then in a twinkling I heard on the roof the prancing and pawing of each little hoof, as I drew in my head and was turning around. Down the chimney St. Nicholas came with a bound. He was dressed all in fur, from his head to his foot, and his clothes were all tarnished with ashes and soot. A bundle of toys he had slung on his back, and he looked like a peddler just opening his pack. His eyes, how they twinkled, his dimples so merry, his cheeks were like roses, his nose like a cherry. His droll little mouth was drawn up like a stump of a pipe he held tight in his teeth, and the smoke it encircled his head like a wreath. He had a broad face and a little round belly, and it shook when he laughed like a bowl full of jelly. He was chubby and plump, a right jolly old elf, and I laughed when I saw him in spite of myself. A wink of his eye and a twist of his head soon gave me to know I had nothing to dread. He spoke not a word, but went straight to his work, and filled all the stockings, then turned with a jerk, and laying a finger aside of his nose, and giving a nod, up the chimney he rose. He sprang to his sleigh, to his team gave a whistle, and away they all flew like the down of a thistle. But I heard him exclaim ere he drove out of sight. Happy Christmas to all. Happy Christmas to all. Happy Christmas to all. And to Happy Christmas to
The gentlemen of Cantus are Jacob Christopher and Zachary Colby, Adam Fieldson, Paul Schultz, Chris Foss, Samuel Greene, David Geist, and Matthew Goins. And we should acknowledge, of course, Charles Dickens, and to Henry and Clement Clarke Moore for providing the three tales of Christmas that these men have shared with you tonight. Also, the gentlemen of Cantus would like to acknowledge for the festive attire in which they are clad this evening one of our nation's finest commercial airlines for their support. So they are grateful for that, and we won't mention any names, but I know the employees of that organization are united in their efforts to restore the outfits that these men were meaning to wear. Well, they're in the middle of a 2-week tour, and things happen. So we thank them. Minnesota chic indeed. Minnesota chic indeed. Christmas comes to us in words and music more than in any other way, and we need it so much this year. And so we are really grateful that you have spent your only New York stop here at WQXR in the Greene Space. Thank you, gentlemen, so much. And you have one more for us, I think. Right?
Together, if the fates allow.